Listen now for what the Spirit is saying to the church in Mark 6, verses 14 through 29. King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying, John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason his powers are at work in him. But others said, it is Elijah. And others said, it is a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. For Herod himself sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him, but she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers and his officers and for the leaders of Galilee. When Herodias' daughter Salome came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it. And he swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half of my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? She replied, the head of John the Baptizer. Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was deeply grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. The word of the Lord. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. This is a pretty lengthy, for Mark, and very ugly, gruesome story. And you've got to wonder why Mark included it in his otherwise terse gospel, which he calls the good news of Jesus Christ. This does not sound like good news. And though Jesus is mentioned and the story rather brilliantly prefigures his death, he's not in the story, and it isn't about him. The story really isn't about John the Baptist either. It links Jesus and John, and it's ostensibly about the death of John, but even he doesn't make an appearance, just his head does. So who and what is this story about, and what's it doing here? It's complicated. The Herod in this story is Herod Antipas, one of the sons of Herod the Great, who was governor of Galilee from 47 to 37 BCE, and king of Judea from 37 to 4 BCE. His son, Herod Antipas, divorced his first wife to marry his niece, Herodias, who inconveniently was already married to his half-brother, Herod Philip. Herodias and Philip had a daughter, Salome, who was Antipas's niece on her father's side and great-niece on her mother's side. With her mother's second marriage, that would be to Antipas, she also became his stepdaughter. Complicated. The adulterous marriage between Antipas and Herodias violated the law of Moses in so many ways. And John the Baptist, doing what prophets do, called them out for their behavior. Herodias took great offense at this, and she wanted to have John killed. But Herod Antipas had just enough of a moral compass left to realize that John was a righteous and holy man, and that killing him would not be in his own best interest either politically or spiritually. Besides, he liked to listen to the prophet. So he met his wife halfway on the issue and locked John up, but kept him close and under protection. But then came the infamous birthday party, which was meant to impress everyone who was anyone in Galilee, and thus further Herod's quite significant political ambitions. All the important people in the region were there. There was probably way more wine than necessary. And there was Salome's dance, which so enchanted, shall we politely say, her stepfather slash uncle slash great uncle, that he made a solemn but reckless promise to give her anything she wanted. She didn't know what she wanted, so she trotted off to her mom, who of course was not at the party, being a woman, and said, "What should I ask for?" And her mom, still clinging to her desire for vengeance, said quickly, "Ask for the head of John the Baptist." The rest is, as they say, history or fable. The girl returns to Herod and, embellishing the request, asks for the head of John on a platter right now. Herod was deeply grieved by the request, but he was also more willing to commit murder than to endure the humiliation of not honoring his oath, which was a serious offense. So he gives the order. The guests apparently remain silent, and an unflinching soldier with chilling efficiency carries out the execution and delivers John's head to the girl. Let me point out that the text does not say that Salome's fateful dance was intentionally seductive. That image comes from centuries of artistic imagination, probably fueled by both gender and cultural bias. Mark's Salome seems more foolish, naive, and compliant than erotic. And Mark calls her Horatio, little girl or young woman. It's the same word used in the previous chapter to refer to Jairus' 12-year-old daughter. So this could be a child's dance. We don't know. But either way, it certainly moved Antipas. Even in a Bible full of dysfunctional families, the Herodian dynasty is notorious. So perhaps this story is just a morality play about greed, pride, forbidden love, vengeance, guilt, lust, and murder. Those elements are all there, and they're the ones that grab our attention. After all, who doesn't love a good soap opera? But I don't think that Mark would spend that much ink on a family drama. He was way too economical with his words for that. All the soap opera themes are there, but they aren't the theme. The theme is politics. Politics as usual, whether in the 1st century or the 21st century. We want the spiritual and the political to be separate, and the latter never to sully the former. But Mark knew that's impossible. He knew that the two worlds are intertwined, that our spiritual life is always played out on the historical political stage. This is a political text that reveals a political agenda that runs throughout Mark's gospel. To gloss over that and to make this about one evil family or one tragic man and one tragic episode does a disservice to Mark, who is acutely aware of the cruel political realities of life in 1st century Palestine, the harsh political world in which Jesus and his disciples lived, and in which Jesus' disciples still live. Remember, it was Herod the Great who, legend says, tried to kill the baby Jesus in an episode known as the Slaughter of the Innocents. A big, strong king was so afraid that a little child would usurp his power that he ordered all the Hebrew boys under the age of 2 to be killed. the crime of a king committed with impunity, which now we call immunity. Herod the Great's sons were no better than he was. Mark calls Antipas king, but he wasn't a king. Maybe Mark was just using the common parlance, but I suspect it was a bit of irony on his part, because though Antipas was not a king, he desperately wanted to be. Instead, he was the Tetrarch of Galilee. Tetrarch means ruler of a quarter, which says something about his status. Antipas was a weak, greedy, paranoid, petty, wannabe king who spent his adult life doing everything he could to cling to what power he had and to grasp for even more, even if that meant murdering an innocent prophet. Antipas was one link in a power chain that ran from the emperor down to the regional and local bureaucrats. Their job was to keep order by what became known as Pax Romana. Contrary to its name, Pax Romana was not peace, but oppression that was maintained by the threat of violence and the acquiescence of all those down the line, from the silence of the powerful guests at the banquet to the silence of the oppressed. Too often, good people remain silent. Too often we bemoan what we know is wrong, but simply resign ourselves to it and allow atrocities to continue, our freedom to be eroded bit by bit, sometimes over years. We acquiesce. We don't demand change, especially if it's something that doesn't really affect us personally. We write off threats and intimidation as just the bluster of a bully. And little by little, we lose our freedom and our moral courage to the sound of silence until it's too late, and our rights have vanished, and a weak, fearful, wannabe king calls for the execution of a righteous person he views as a political threat, and he does it with impunity, only now we call it immunity. Same thing. This is a political tale, a warning to prophets who dare speak truth to power, a warning to good, honest people who are committed to doing what is right, a warning to disciples now and then who would follow Jesus, a warning that if you are an agent of God and have the courage to stand up to corrupt bullies, you can expect to pay a price. It's also a warning that if we remain silent, we can expect to pay a price. I want to end with good news here because that's what preachers are supposed to do. Always end a sermon with good news. But honestly, there is no good news in this text. And yet, if we step just outside the boundaries of this text, we can find the good news. This is one of Mark's sandwiches, a story within a story. But today we were only given the insides of the sandwich. In their wisdom, the good folks who designed the Revised Common Lectionary left off the bread that holds it together. Right before this morning's lesson, we read that Jesus called the 12, commissioned them, and sent them out 2 by 2 on their first mission trip. And they cast out demons and cured the sick. Immediately following this morning's lesson, we read about the return of the 12, full of faith and stories of their successes. And this is the good news. We keep sending out disciples in Christ's name, not naively, but courageously, with eyes wide open to the risk of standing up for truth in a world full of Herods. We send disciples into the streets of Baltimore and to El Salvador and Cuba and Pajuta-Zizi to listen, to pray, to work with our partners, to heal and to be healed by our shared faith. We send them out, eyes wide open and hearts full of the love of Christ. Liturgical poet Steve Garnath Holmes says this about today's text. It has all the sordid ingredients of a sinister thriller: power, bitterness, shame, a whistleblower jailed, family dysfunction, politics, wine, women, and debauchery, violence, and a dance number that takes a deadly turn. Doesn't sound like a very good Bible story, does it? But this is not a detour from the gospel. This is the context of the gospel. This is the realm where the mercy of God works, where courageous faith in God's grace meets the crass violence of this world. This is where the gentle followers of Jesus work their love and courage. We wish we lived in a peaceful world with small problems. But the world gives selfishness and fear great power, and they kill people. People do what they know is wrong until they don't know anymore, and they do harm. And we live among them, not by default, but precisely because they need us, and we have been given to them. This world needs humility, generosity, and grace. For every Herod, it needs 1,000 Christs. For this, to this, we are sent. In the end, grace shall prevail. But beware, it will be hard in the meantime. And I would like